Good morning. I get invitations, occasionally to pick up the phone, and I've had more than one of these from Wayne. Could you come and talk about policy? And so I get the explanation, and one of the first questions I ask myself now when I get invited to do anything is like, would this be fun? Would I have fun if I did this? So, the answer was yes. So then I hang up the phone, and it's like, I'm an agronomist, and they keep asking me to talk about policy. And for a while I felt kind of lonely in that, and I realized that Rob Myers, Rob and I helped lead the policy action team. Rob's an agronomist too. So policy is actually relatively new to me. Even when I worked with Wayne at ARS, I didn't have a lot to do with policy. I found that I've learned policy by teaching, which is interesting. There's a whole lot going on, and Wayne asked me to kind of give the big picture here rather than a small kind of focus picture, and I'm happy to do that. So we decided we'd just call it Connecting the Dots, and it has a lot of analogy to the way that we think about soil health, that there is a lot of components to this, and they interact in a lot of different ways. And so I'm gonna talk at this level. I decided I was going to be somewhat minimalist, so I'm going to use more than one slide, but I'm not going to use 25. I think there's about 8. So being an agronomist, I thought, maybe I should at least look and see what policy actually means. We all have our own view of what policy means and kind of what it encompasses, whether we're talking about soil health or we're talking about anything else in the food system, sustainability, all of those kinds of things. So, I used the internet machine and Googled policy. I understand how to pronounce it now. That's great. It is a noun, not a verb. And there, of course, when you use the internet, there's actually like thousands of definitions of policy. This was the first one that came up, and it's actually, I like this definition, and you'll kind of see as I go along why I like it, is that it's not talking about a specific kind of mechanism. It's talking about an approach, and specifically a course or principle of action adopted by or proposed by a government, party, business, or individual. If you would have asked me, even 6, 7, 8 years ago about soil health policy, I would have made some assumptions really quickly about what that meant, probably starting with USDA, or maybe more specifically the Farm Bill and other pieces of legislation. I now view that, not just for soil health, but for a lot of things, as being much more similar to this kind of definition of what policy is that this can play out in many, many different ways with lots of different actors. And if we want to have policy that makes a difference, that has an impact, then we do need to be thinking about things like scale, or maybe both scale and scope. So in the realm of soil health, how many millions or tens of millions of acres or hectares do you want to impact is about scale, but also about scope. So what are all of the different ways that we either end up degrading soil or we improve soil health? Sector. So again, we can think of policy coming from the government sector and influencing the private sector, farmers and ranchers, but also other players in the food system. There's actually policy that goes across all of those sectors, and sectors develop their own policy, their own approaches to this. And the approaches for soil health are obviously very, very numerous. There are certainly, again, as we talk about this at this meeting and at other meetings, we think about kind of a list of different things that we can do. And the Institute, for example, is working on what are the different things that we can measure so that we know about trajectory, which direction is soil health going. And then there's interest. So we may do this. Wayne made the point and illustrated some of the kind of grand challenges that we face environmentally. So we do some things specifically to try to mitigate some of the environmental outcomes from the production of food and fiber. But there's also self-interest, and there's a profit motive involved in all of this. And my point in kind of describing these is that those are all appropriate. Again, it's not one single pathway that describes policy. It's many things. and it plays out at all different scales. Current soil health policy, and if there's one slide, I could have just used this slide because I decided I'm going to try to make one point today, and this slide is the point. And it's remarkable, if you ask me personally, how quickly this has come about, that the actions and activities around soil health, which involve all of those different players developing their approaches from our definition. One is that it's already playing out at multiple scales. As I'll point out in a minute, soil health improvement is inherently local, but it is playing out geographic scales, economic scales, all of those things. So again, not a single pathway, but multiple pathways. It is across sectors. There's policy and action being developed across sectors. I'll focus a little bit more in a minute about what that means, and we'll see with the two speakers that follow me specific sector level activity, specifically governmental sector, but there's a lot of different ways that this plays out. There's many, many different approaches and incentives involved. As I mentioned earlier, some of this is environmental, some of it's economic, some of it is very, very forward-looking. How do we maintain productivity over centuries, for example? And it addresses these diverse interests across interest groups, across sectors, just continually. And these four things have come about really in the last 10 years, even though the science behind this has been evolving for quite a bit longer than that. As I mentioned when this slide came up, I find it just remarkable that it has happened in these very, very diverse ways as quickly as it has. And part of that, I think, and I don't need to tell this group, but when they give you a microphone, you should use it, is that this is one of those rare issues that everybody agrees that this is an appropriate and kind of challenging goal that we have to improve soil health. So it is not one of the issues where you immediately come to loggerheads about, no, I think about this way and you think about it that way, and then we're already in disagreement. And I think that has been really, really helpful in just the rate that this has taken place over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years. So that's all, to me, those things are all just great news. And again, it has played out very quickly. I mentioned this at the beginning. Soil health is inherently local. It is tied, physically to places, and whether those places are, as Wayne mentioned, it might be a small urban garden, it might be a ranch. The one on the left is a ranch in the Sandhills of Nebraska. Crop fields, big scale, little scale, but soil health improves at a very specific place over time. And as Wayne also pointed out, the implications of this are global. A lot of discussion, particularly around the role of carbon and the possibilities to capture atmospheric carbon by improving soil health, but all of the other myriad environmental impacts that come from our agricultural and food sector, those are global in scale. So thinking about how those things are connected is something that increasingly we're called on to do. And as you will hear again and again, all of these things are connected, but they're connected in very complex ways. The two speakers that follow me, Secretary Karen Ross from here in California and Alyssa Charney from the Sustainable Ag Coalition, we'll talk about specifically government sector policies around soil health, one here in the state of California, which has definitely been a leader in this and many other areas that we care about, and also at the federal level. So we recently completed a Farm Bill cycle in late 2018, but it's never too early to start working on the next one. Whether that comes through a farm bill or through other types of activities, and this is something that Rob and I and others in this room have talked about, what are the different ways that federal policy impacts the implementation of practices? So this is, in most cases, an incentive-based approach. So I want to go back to this definition for just a minute, and then I'm going to close. That it is this course of action across government, party, business, or individuals, and you'll hear a couple of the government approaches here in just a minute. But it has also been really interesting to see at both the individual level, so the commitments that individuals, some of whom are farmers and ranchers, but also many others, that are developing a policy, a specific way that they want to impact soil health on whatever scale they choose to impact it, and also businesses. And I spend a fair amount of time thinking about and working on broad issues of sustainability in the food system, along supply chains, for example, large companies, small companies, things like that. And the appearance of soil and soil health in that over the last 10 years has also been pretty remarkable. So you will see large companies in supply chains making plans, implementing actions that are specifically focused on soil, which would not have been the case even 15 or 20 years ago. So to me, that's exactly why this particular gathering has gone from maybe 125 people 4 short years ago to nearly 350 now, is that all of these different things are now in play: government, business, nonprofit, individuals. I think our challenge on the kind of policy and action side is that all of these things are, they're not just being planned right now, they are already in play. Things are happening in all of these different realms, and to be thinking about how those things are connected. And are they, are there places where they're working at cross purposes? Are there synergies that we're missing, maybe across sectors? All of those kinds of things are kind of the next wave of things that we will need to be thinking about. But I'm an optimist in life in general, but for the activity in soil health, I can't help to be anything other than an optimist, because there is just a whole lot of activity going on right now in this realm. So you'll notice I didn't try to define soil health. I only defined policy. If you were at the PED talk last night, I mean, that was remarkable. We all kind of carry our own definitions around in our heads about what soil health is. Whether it is a specific thing or, as Wayne pointed out, it is a system, it's kind of a way of thinking about that component of the world. There's a lot of really, really interesting things happening. There's a lot of really interesting discussions that will take place today. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy your time here. Hope to get to talk to all of you. Thanks.